Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about itemization in Diablo 4. Now, it's really important to know which items you want to equip, how do you upgrade them, how do you upgrade your character, especially when you're stuck and you feel like you cannot progress anymore. Now, this might be a longer video. Table of contents is up there and timestamps down in the description. I want to harp onto this point a little bit more before we get into it, because when people say they are stuck and they cannot progress, a lot of the times they're looking at the wrong places. If we, for example, look at the skill tree in Diablo 4, it is not all that complex, right? You kind of choose your main skill, you put points into it, and then you have a singular decision here at the end, right? Everybody takes this, there's no decision here. I don't even know why these points exist, right? And that's about it. Other than that, you basically decide what kind of defensive skills you want. And at the end, chances are you have like 15 to 25 points left, and you put them in some kind of passive skills. So what I'm trying to say that in terms of weight, how much your decisions matter, items will make the most difference. Now, obviously, once you get into Paragon boards, sure, you could say there's a lot of decisions here, but honestly, after looking at it a little bit more, if you just pick up all the rare nodes, that makes sense. You can even completely ignore glyphs for the first 60, 70 levels because you're not going to have them leveled up. They don't have radius. Items are where most of your decision power will come in, so that is the most important metric, I would say, for a build. But let's get into it. Starting at the very basics, which is there is 3 relevant item rarities, right? So there is normal and magic items, and usually in RPGs, they play some kind of role. For example, in PoE, you can just craft an item from scratch, right? In this game, you cannot. So you can't craft an item from scratch with a normal item. Magic items are never better than rare items. So they're basically just there to fill the screen. Relevant to gearing are rares, legendaries, and uniques. Rare items drop with 3 to 4 stats, whereas legendaries always drop with 4 stats. Now, legendaries are not like in other games where there's a special legendary that's called a certain way, and then it has exactly the same stats. In this game, that is unique items. Unique items always have the same mods when you drop them, exactly the same. So for example, this item will always have crit damage, damage to close enemies, damage to ensured, and life gain on kill, and will always have this ability down here regarding stealth. Whereas legendary items are basically just rare items that drop with a certain legendary aspect. So what that means is you can basically convert rare items into legendary items later, and every good endgame build will have either all legendaries or legendaries and uniques. Now, between these rare items, there are distinctions to be made. And since I said that legendary items are basically just extensions of rare items, it's the same for them. There is normal rare items that have a lower item power. They have less stats, what that means in a second. But basically, these drop in World Tier 1 and 2. So this is where you will start out with Adventurer, Veteran, and then over time, you will unlock both Nightmare and Torment after you complete certain capstone dungeons. Now, it even tells you this on the side, right? Here, no mention of sacred or ancestral items. In Tier 3, it tells you sacred items and unique items can drop. And then in Tier 4, ancestral items and new unique items can drop. And these make a huge difference, which is why you want to be able to farm these higher tiers as soon as possible. It's usually kind of like a weird dance where you kind of feel too weak to upgrade, but if you don't run it, you will never get the good items that make you strong enough to run that content. So usually what happens is you get into this weird power curve where you feel really weak, but then you drop a few rare items, upgrade some of your gear, and then all of a sudden it kind of makes sense. But next up, let's talk about item power. For example, on this item, we have 774. But what does it actually do? Well, on weapons, it gives you base damage. If you're a PoE player, you already know what that means, but basically, the skills in this game are all percentage based. Like for example, if you look here, if I had nothing equipped, right? If I unequip my weapon and I looked at wind shear, right here it would say 0 to 0 damage, and in brackets 17%. 17% of what? Your base damage up there. Once I equip this, you will see that the skill will go up. So this is the baseline damage of everything you deal. All the increases, all the multipliers will scale off of this, which makes the weapon or the weapon and the offhand the most important slot on your character. And whereas item power is not as important on some of your other gear pieces, it is on your weapon, even if it doesn't have the perfect stats underneath, which we're going to talk about in a second. Now, on stuff like gloves, helmets, pants, body armors, and boots, item power determines your armor. So still important, but not as important as, for example, setting the baseline for your damage, but still very, very valuable. Armor is goddamn strong in this game. And when it comes to stuff like rings and amulets, it will determine how high your implicits roll, which are mostly resistances right now, which aren't that great at the moment. So on jewelry, it's not as important. However, there are certain breakpoints to item power. And these are the breakpoints that we're talking about. 1 to 149, and whatnot, up to the most important one, which is that you break 725 plus. Now, if we're talking about sacred and ancestral items, they fall into this category right here. So that is why it's so important to actually get into higher tiers. Now, why these breakpoints are so important is because the highest stats, so for example, if we look at these boots, movement speed can only roll on an item with 725 plus item power. So not only does it determine your armor, it also determines whether the item can actually roll in the highest brackets, in the highest tiers. So that's why it's incredibly important to have 725 plus. Now, whereas most item slots, that is the break-off point. After that, it could be a GG item. Like I said, when it comes to weapon, you want as high as possible. Important to note, you can increase the item power of an item by upgrading. For example, if we look at the item power here, 800 plus 25 item power. So for example, if you have an item that had 700 and you upgrade it 5 times, you get to 725, breaking this one right here. More on upgrading later. But next, let's talk about item modifiers. So there is up to 4 modifiers on every item. And they give you stats. For example, here a crit chance, lucky hit chance, attack speed, and int. These mods have a roll range. For example, if you look at critical strike chance, you see 3% to 8%. As of this recording, you cannot really adjust this. So you're going to have to stick with the 5%. There's nothing like a divine orb that rerolls everything randomly, like for example in Path of Exile. So not only does it matter what mod you roll, it also matters how high the percentage is. Once again, starting at 725 item power is where you get the best tier. Now, the reason why the stats on this item, for example, the attack speed goes from 6.6 to 15, and the attack speed on here only goes from 4.4 to 10%, is because we upgraded the item, as you can see up here. There's also no prefix or suffix system, so it's not like critical strike is a prefix, intelligence is a suffix, and it has like 2 prefixes. No. There's just stats. So if we, for example, look at Helm right here, all classes can roll these right here. And it's just a combination of 4 of these. Barbarian has certain things, Druid has certain things, and so on. I'll tell you more about what stats are desirable a little later in the section of the video. So now that we've gone through the very basics of itemization, we have to talk about legendary aspects first. Now, legendary aspects are incredibly strong effects, unique effects that you can put on your items. They drop only on legendaries and can later be extracted and also imprinted on items. What does that mean? For example, your companions gain the bonus from the Bestial Rampage key passive, right? These are build-defining things. For example, for my build right here, Trample now summons 6 landslides, which deal more damage, yada, yada, yada. Very, very important. I have another one that reduces the cooldown of something, right? Most of your builds will revolve around these aspects. So you might think, well, that's really annoying, right? So I have to roll a really good weapon and get exactly that aspect on it. That is not how it works. You can actually extract them and imprint them. So for example, if I took this weapon right here and I said, I really want this companion thingy on a different weapon, for example, I can extract this right here. So extract aspect, I click it, and now it's itemized as an aspect right here. Let's do that again. Let's, for example, say I want this one on a different weapon. We can do it again. Extract aspect, and it's here again. One important thing you have to know is that there is a difference on where you put your aspects on. And what I mean by that is that everything has sort of like a roll range, right? For example, here it says Pulverize is now also an earth skill. There's no roll there, right? Like the blue number down there is a roll. Between 754 and 1078, this always stays the same, even if you imprint it on another item. And this can get increased depending on where you put it on. For example, if you put it on a 200 weapon, you get 100% more effect. On amulets, it gets 50% more effect, and everything else stays normal. So for example, if I wanted to have this power amped up, right? The blue number from 916 doubled, I would put it on a 200. So the way I do this is I put them onto the occultist, then I choose an aspect from inventory, I right click it in, and then you can see the outcome, and that is basically double. Important to notice that only the numbers in blue actually scale, the numbers in yellow do not. So for example, I don't get any extra duration on this item. As you can see down here, it's still over 2 seconds. And yeah, so for example, if you have stuff that is kind of static, like for example, your companions gain something that is not numerical, so you wouldn't want to put it on your two-hander, you would want to put it on anything but your two-hander or an amulet. This is why often you will see certain builds that have one aspect that's super strong. They will actually opt for two-hander, maybe just because of that, even though maybe one-hander plus offhand would usually be better. So we clicked on imprint aspect. It costs you these baleful fragments, and they basically, I guess you can't see it, but they basically get extracted from salvaging legendaries, more on salvaging or selling later. Then we just click imprint, accept, and we have our new item right here. Now, even more important, especially for the start, let's next up talk about the Codex of Power. As you can see right here, there's another option, right? I can choose an aspect from my inventory, or I can choose one from the Codex of Power. What this is basically an accumulation of certain aspects that the developers wanted you to have access to earlier. And the way they did that is with aspects. So for example, here you can see Earth skills deal 30% more critical strike damage to crowd control enemies, unlocked by completing a certain dungeon in the world, right? So you can see right here where you can get it, and then you can see what it does. Now you can imprint any amount of these powers onto any of your items. So for example, if we take this right here, we can say Codex of Power, show only my class. And then we can take this earthen aspect. This only costs gold and some resources, right? Imprint aspect, and is going to be on it. However, once you imprinted it, you will see there's a roll range there. Did you just get unlucky with the 30 to 40, or what's going on there? The answer is no, you didn't get unlucky. You always get the lowest possible roll if you use the Codex of Power. You can look at this basically as legendary aspects that you don't have to drop first. You can just unlock them and basically get up your character, gear up your character, and then later you can find better versions of them. Another example would be if we go to defensive mods right here, we can see one of the most used aspect here. Get armor for 4 seconds when you deal any form of damage. It stacks up to 25%, right? But if you look at my helmet, I have 40% right here. And that's because this one can only drop, right? So first up, what I started out with is on my first item, I just put this on the Codex, and then later over time, you will upgrade these items. Just to be clear, not every legendary aspect is also on the Codex. So some build-defining items you might not be able to just copy from your Codex. You might actually have to find them. So definitely do some research on whatever you want to play first and see if it's actually available. Now, if you go to your map right here and you go to Collections, Codex of Power, and you find an aspect that you really want, let's say I really want this Dark Shroud one, I can click on it and it will automatically set a pin on the map. So let's see where it is. Yeah, it is down here. So to summarize, Codex is great for early game power. You can get certain legendary effects, but you will have the minimum roll possible. Then let's talk about sockets. Sockets are pretty damn straightforward in this game. You have 2 on your pants, 2 on your body armor, 2 on your two-hander, or 1 on your one-hander and 1 on your offhand, so the same amount, and 1 on your helmet, and then 1 each on your jewelry. Now, if you go to your jeweler right here, you will see that there's different types. There is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different types, in fact, and they have different effects. So for example, if you go right here, this is the highest tier of Amethyst, damage over time, damage taken over time, and shadow resistances, depending on where you socket it in. If you're wondering how can you add socket, you can do it right here, add sockets, you put the item in and it gets a socket. So for example, boom, add socket. Now be a little bit careful with these early. Right here, you can see scattered prisms. These are not super rare once you get into endgame, but definitely early on, they will be very scarce. Later though, just socket away. You can also unsocket an item by basically, I don't know, putting a gem in, then clicking on the item and it will remove the gem. Good to know though is if you don't need an item anymore that has a certain gem in it, you can also vendor it and you will get the gem for free back. Now in terms of what's good, it kind of depends on your build, but pretty much a no-brainer on armor is maximum life, for example, or if you have very good fortify uptime, usually the damage reduction while fortified is even better. On jewelry, I would say mostly the flawless skull down here, which for some reason I don't have in here anymore, is probably the best with the +2 armor. And when it comes to weapons, the most used one is probably the critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies, because most builds have a very reliable way, or some other builds can also use the ones that give crit damage to crowd control. However, this is very, very generalized, so just if you follow a build, definitely do what they say, or if you have a better idea, go ahead. Then let's talk about upgrading. So if you go right here, you can repair, and then you can upgrade your item right here. So what you have to understand is upgrading increases the stats of your items, and it also increases your item power. Now, for example, if we take just like the first item we see right here, and we upgrade it, we can see right here it costs some rawhide, which is nothing. It also always costs gold. So then I've upgraded it once, right? If I want to do it twice, it costs a new currency. Then it costs veiled crystals, which early on can be kind of a problem, but later on you will find so many, they just drop from almost every single rare you encounter. And then we get into a little bit more rare materials. So the coiling wards you actually get from salvaging legendary armor, right? So if we upgrade that right here, boom. And then the last one right here is only found in Helltide events. These are special events where you can drop these from elites and also the chests. So when we talk about upgrading early on, I would tell you to only go up to 4, very, very early at the max to 3. But in endgame, you definitely want to go all the way and you want to farm up those Helltides. So as you can see right here, these stars mean 4. And all my gear that I'm currently wearing is obviously upgraded to 5. It makes a huge difference. Upgrades do not just increase your armor or your DPS on your weapon. They also increase all the rolls. So for example, the +2 can go to +3. +3 can go up to +5. Intelligence goes up, strength goes up. Now next up, let's talk about re-rolling mods. If you didn't know, you can go to the occultist right here. And you can go to enchant item. Now you can replace an unwanted affix with a new one right here at the cost of materials and also a ton of gold. Now you can replace the affix as many times as you want, but only 1 on every item. I'll give you an example. This item is trash, so don't take this for anything. But let's say, oh, I really want the strength and int, and I'm a landslide build. So +2 to landslide is good. The +2 to tornado is completely useless for me. Well, what I can do here is I can once choose, for example, the ranks of tornado, and I can reroll it. It's called enchant down here. And you can see that it also costs forgotten souls. And this is one of the biggest currencies endgame that you can only get from Helltides. And these are super important to pick up whenever you can. That's why people always go for Helltides. So it's very, very expensive to reroll. Now you can see here, it's only costs 30k gold. But if I click enchant right here, now I get 2 options to change this stat. For example, here, oh, I really want that crit chance, and I can click replace affix. If there's nothing here that I actually want, I can also click no change. But for example, let's say I really want the crit. It tells me this gets removed and I get the crit on. Replace affix, and there you go. I have the crit. Now, let's say that later you're like, oh, this critical strike chance is a little bit low though. Maybe I can reroll it for it again. You can reroll this one stat as often as you want. However, the other 3 affixes are now locked in. And as you can see here, the enchant cost goes up drastically. The crafting cost, as far as I know, stays the same. It will always cost you 1 forgotten souls. But for example, let's say I want to reroll enchant. Oh, I didn't hit anything. That sucks, right? So we're just going to do no change. We're going to keep the critical strike chance. It's going to stay the same. Yeah, the crafting cost here stays the same. The gold goes up for each try. Now, I just want to make this clear. In order to get your GG gear, you will use this a lot. There will be a lot of gold spending here. I'm talking millions, even hundreds of millions later. So if you're early on in the game and you feel like you're swimming in gold, everything's so easy. Oh, Paragon Point reset, that's so easy. Nothing costs any money. Here is the real culprit. And if you want true endgame gear, this is where most of it is going to go in. And that's also why you always should farm the Helltides if you can. But then let's talk about selling versus salvaging real quick. This is probably the question I get asked the most. Should I salvage my items like this right here? I get some salvage material back. Or should I actually sell it for gold? Right? Like here, I get 17,900 for gold for this. Now, I could just say it depends because it's true. However, I will give you a little bit more context depending on when you are in the game. Early in the game, I would say salvage almost everything. Unless there's some reason, maybe a respec or something, you really need that gold. I would just salvage it all because you need even the most basic of mats. So for example, if we go right here to the blacksmith and I salvage a rare, there is a good chance if it is higher level. Actually, is there any? Yeah, so for example, this one right here is ancestral. We're going to get rare crafting materials, the veiled crystals. These are going to be hard to get early. Later, you're going to swim in them, but early on, I would salvage as much as you can. Now, later on, your rare gear will be worth a ton of gold, depending on what is it ancestral, is it sacred. These can sell up to like 20,000 gold or higher, depending, and legendaries can sell even higher. If we do the math on a full inventory of items, for example, let's say it's all rares, no legendaries, we have 33 inventory slots, and let's say on average they sell for 15,000 gold. We're talking about an inventory that gives you 500,000 gold, and you're going to swim in these rares later. Now, in late game, what I would tell you to do is salvage all the legendaries that you can, because there's going to be certain currency that you are not always going to have infinite of. So for example, if I salvage this right here, I can see that I get a baleful fragment. This was one of the ones we used earlier. You use quite a few of these. However, when it comes to rares, I would usually go and sell it. So just go here, sell it to the vendor. As for uniques, I usually keep one of each unique, but they are worth a ton of gold. For example, here you see sell value 210,000. I usually keep one of each and the rest I just sell. So in short, early game salvage all, end game salvage legendaries, sell rares. However, adjust it to your needs. Now at the end here, let's talk about stat priorities. And I just want to make clear that this is not to tell you exactly what you want to get on your build, because it is build dependent. I don't know, whoever was watching is going to play what build. It very much depends on that. However, what I want to give you with this is if you look at an item, you can approximately see what is worthwhile to keep and what is not. When I started the game, it was incredibly hard for me to look at an item and know whether it's good or not. It took so much time that I would rather kill monsters with, so that's what I kind of want to get with this. Now, first up is cooldown reduction. Diablo 4 is a very cooldown heavy game. Let's be real. Probably 3 to 4 of your skills will have cooldowns, and getting up your defensive skills earlier or maybe your offensive skills is just going to be so damn strong. I'm pretty sure cooldown reduction is going to get nerfed over time, so this might change in the future. When it comes to movement speed is very scarce in this game. Right now, you can get it from boots and from the amulet. Now, this might depend on classes. I'm not really sure. I haven't really seen anything else. There's also certain legendary aspects that give you movement speed, which are very important. But in general, I don't even look at an amulet that doesn't have movement speed or a boots that don't have movement speed, unless the other 3 mods are perfect, and then I'm just going to roll like crazy for movement speed. There's 0 chance I'm not going to go for them. Besides just being fast and making your build feel better, it also means you can run out of enemy attacks quicker, which is going to be very worthwhile, especially endgame. And then also plus 2 levels. For example, you can see right here, I have plus 4 ranks of landslide, and this gives me a huge damage increase. Now, how much damage exactly kinda depends, but I would say in general, it will give you around about 10 to 12% more damage per rank. I would mostly use these on your main skill, your main damage dealer, but there's also things like on Sork, for example, Frost Nova. If you get more levels, you get less cooldown recovery, which is once again really, really strong, or maybe on your teleport. So that is the first tier. Second tier, I would say, is every sort of damage reduction mod, maximum life, and armor at the end. Armor, I would say, quite depends on what class you are. For example, on the Barb, armor is way more worthwhile than, for example, on a Sork. But damage reduction mods across the board are just incredible. For example, these pants, which have triple damage reduction from close, damage reduction from distant, and also just straight up damage reduction in general. You will see stuff like damage reduction from poison, from burning, whatever, which is also a huge boon if you can actually apply those ailments. Then you have maximum life. The reason life is so strong in this game is you get so much. Like, compared to something like PoE, where you get like small incremental increases. If you can see right here, I have 6,885 life right now, right? And just my helmet alone gives me 849, but that's also increased by all the increased maximum life, right? So if I equip it, I basically lose over 1,000 life. If I had life rolls on every gear piece I wanted, I would be over 10,000 life. That is how crazy it is. The reason max life is also so strong is because the potions in this game, for the most part, also scale percentage-wise. So if you have 10,000 life, you're also going to recover more. Now, after all that is settled, we can talk about offensive stats. Now, I want to make this clear. Damage reduction mods, life, and armor. At the start, you might think this is not a big deal. Enemies hit like a wet noodle. That difficulty goes up so fast. If you don't gradually increase your defenses, you'll be at a point where you're like, oh, I'm just getting one shot and now I need better gear, but the gear drops from the mobs that I get one shot by. So just keep that in mind. It gets a lot harder across the board. If we talk about stat priorities in terms of offense, usually what comes up first is crit chance, to a lesser, not really lesser extent, crit damage, but the thing is, if you don't have enough crit chance, crit damage just doesn't do anything. Crit damage is still incredibly valuable. But this is once again super build dependent. Lucky hit chance could be your best stat. It could be your worst stat, depending on what you run, right? Like, lucky hit chance, if you don't know, is basically a proc coefficient. So yeah, if you have nothing to proc, it sucks. If you have like 5 things to proc, it's insane. Now, when it comes to main stat and stacking main stat, it really depends on what your build does. If you are int or willpower based, my personal opinion is those are the worst stats to stack. Now, doesn't mean that you can't do it. It's still good, don't get me wrong. But if you're strength-based or dexterity-based, now we're talking. Now, when it comes to vulnerable damage, this is its own damage multiplier. That is why it's very, very strong to stack. However, not all classes have 100% uptime on it. So depending on your uptime of vulnerable, it might be better or worse. After that, we have everything else that I forgot or that's specific to your class. And then we have resistances. Resistances currently are something you want to get on no piece of gear. This might change in the future, but as of this recording, resistances are absolute dog shit. Now, I would go into detail, but Crip already made a really good video about it, so we'll link that down in the description. But yeah, that's about it. I hope I didn't forget anything. If I did, put it down in the comments. Whether you're new to Diablo or maybe you could like learn a few new things here. I hope you enjoyed the video. overall, I would say definitely keep track of your items. Diablo 4 is a game that is very unforgivable. You can't just like skip your upgrades for 10 levels, like for example in Path of Exile. But yeah, that's it from me. Since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.